charged with espionage. His lawyer says the charges are unfounded, but a Russian news site claims he was in possession of classified material. And North Korean defection? A top North Korean diplomat and his wife have reportedly disappeared from the streets of Rome. Could they have been kidnapped by Kim Jong-un's regime and brought back home? Or did they defect and seek asylum in the West? I'm Wolf Blitzer. You're in the Situation Room.
This is CNN Breaking News.
Breaking news, President Trump's world just changed dramatically. The new Congress has been sworn in, and Democrats are now in charge of the House. Nancy Pelosi is the new Speaker, the first in more than half a century to reclaim the gavel after losing power. House Democrats are prepared to use their new power to launch investigations of the president and his administration, while Pelosi now says it's an open discussion whether a sitting president can be indicted. On one front, the battle lines are drawn, as Democrats are already pushing legislation to reopen parts of the government that have been shut down for nearly 2 weeks. The package contains no new funding for the president's border wall. I'll speak with Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of the Judiciary Committee, and our correspondents and analysts have full coverage of the day's top stories. Let's get right to the breaking news. CNN's Sunil Sarfati is up on Capitol Hill. Caitlin Collins is over at the White House. But let's begin with CNN congressional correspondent Phil Mattingly. Phil, what will Democrats do with this new power, and how concerned should the president be?
Yeah, Wolf, for all the history and barriers broken, for all the pomp and circumstance, you can see members and their families lined up behind me heading into Statuary Hall for a reception. There is a new reality, and that's with Democratic power comes a new level of oversight, a new level of subpoena power that the Trump administration simply has not had to deal with for their first 2 years in office. And with that, Democrats pledge a lot of work in the days and weeks and months ahead, something new Speaker Nancy Pelosi alluded to on the floor.
Our nation is at an historic moment. 2 months ago, the American people spoke and demanded a new dawn. They called upon the beauty of our Constitution, our system of checks and balances that protects our democracy, remembering that the legislative branch is Article 1, the first branch of government, co-equal to the presidency and to the judiciary.
And Wolf, Democrats plan to deploy those checks and balances and the subpoena power that comes with them in spades, targeting cabinet officials, targeting the White House, targeting the president's own business interests in the weeks and months ahead. Obviously, hanging over all of this is the continued conversation inside the new Democratic caucus about how far they want to go. It's an issue Democratic leaders have largely batted away over the course of the last couple of months. This is how now Speaker Nancy Pelosi addressed the impeachment issue earlier today.
We have to wait and see what happens with the Mueller report. We shouldn't be impeaching for a political reason, and we shouldn't avoid impeachment for a political reason. So we just have to see how it comes.
And the key I'm hearing repeatedly from Democratic members and senior staffers, Wolf, is that they want to wait until Robert Mueller, the special counsel, puts out his report before they decide or pledge to do anything. But the reality is, it is certainly on the table if it's merited. We'll have to see if it's merited in Democrats' minds in the months ahead.
Phil, the government shutdown now approaching the 2-week mark. Do Democrats have a plan?
They do, and they're actually going to vote on that plan, a plan of 2 bills in just a few hours. House Democrats will vote on and pass a package of funding bills to reopen a large majority of the government through the fiscal year until the end of September. The most contentious bill that's still out there, to reopen the Department of Homeland Security, Democrats will vote to reopen that for a month. They say to continue negotiations over the issue that has divided Democrats in the White House over the course of the last couple of weeks, the border wall. Now, Wolf, we've talked about this. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, Republicans still control the chamber. He has said they're not willing to take up anything on the Senate floor unless the president says he'll support it. More Democrats I talk to say, look, even if McConnell says no right now, they believe this will put pressure on his members to sign off, particularly as the bite of this shutdown starts to grow, as paychecks start to become missed. So with a meeting scheduled at the White House with congressional leaders tomorrow, the House plan that they will pass tonight is expected to be the Democratic position for at least the next couple of days to come.
Phil Mattingly up on Capitol Hill, thanks very much. The 116th Congress is the most diverse in history with a record number of women and minorities. Let's go to our congressional correspondent, Sunlen Serfati. Sunlen, you've been talking with the new members entering the House. Tell us what you're hearing, what you're learning.
Well, Wolf, it certainly is a new day here in Washington, and the weight of this moment not lost on these new members, many of whom now carry with them this title of historic first, like the first two Native Americans to serve in Congress, Congresswoman Deb Haaland and Sharice David. They had a moment earlier today on the floor of the U.S. House, moments before they were sworn in. You see them there, such a touching moment, just embracing, wiping away tears. Haaland went on to tell me that she still hasn't fully grasped everything that's happened to her. And another first, Ilan Omar. She is the first Somali American in Congress and among the first two Muslim American women in Congress. Now, she talked about how she had a moment with her father arriving here in Washington. She said the last time that they were together at this airport in Washington, D.C. is when they came here as refugees 23 years ago. Here's what she told me earlier today.
As we exited our planes, we realized that him and I had not returned on that same airport since the day we first landed here as refugees. And so, you know, it's a very really overwhelming and emotional time for us. And I don't think, you know, as my dad said, you know, he had high hopes for us about the opportunities we would have when we came to this country. But I don't think he imagined that someday his baby would be going to Congress just 20 years after we arrived here.
And that was her father there in the background, and he was choking up. And I asked him what he thought of her journey from refugee to congresswoman in a little over 20 years, and he just called it amazing. Now, she is just one of the many new faces as part of this new Congress, this new record-breaking makeup, the fact that now this is the most racially diverse Congress in history with a record-breaking number of women. And I wanted to show you just the changes in the House of Representatives alone. But notably, you can see here the breakdown, a big divide between the parties here. The number of women, African Americans, Hispanic, LGBTQ members, all going up for the Democrats, but not so for the Republicans. But certainly, Wolf, again, a new day, a lot of new members up here from a range of backgrounds, perspectives, certainly bringing in that experience up here to Washington. Wolf.
Good point. Sunlen, thank you very much. While the balance of power in Washington now has tilted a certain amount, both sides are still dug in on the government shutdown and funding for the president's border wall. Let's go to our White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, we just saw President Trump show up in the White House briefing room for the first time to make a pitch for the wall. What was that all about?
Well, Wolf, he showed up in the press briefing room, but neither the president nor the press secretary took any questions from the reporters who had gathered in that room pretty abruptly when the White House announced overhead that there would be a press briefing in 5 minutes. Instead, the president came out. He made brief remarks about his argument for why he believes it's worth shutting the government down over funding his much-promised border wall. And then he invited members of the National Border Patrol Council to come up and also make some brief remarks after what the president said was a meeting in the Oval Office. But then the president, the press secretary, and the White House communications director all turned on their heels and left the room without taking any of the questions from the reporters in the room there about the government shutdown. And Wolf, that comes as the White House and Democrats very much remain in a deadlock in these negotiations. And today, no progress has been made, and we are no closer to seeing the government reopen. The blame game for who owns the government shutdown continues to shift tonight, with President Trump now faulting the politics of the upcoming 2020 presidential election, claiming Democrats are going all out on the desperately needed wall and border security so they can win. That despite White House officials telling reporters last night Nancy Pelosi wanted to keep the government shut down so she could win enough votes to become House Speaker, even though she ran unchallenged. The president's aides now trying to place the blame squarely on Democrats.
But he doesn't end the shutdown any longer.
Despite Trump saying this in front of the cameras in the Oval Office last month.
I will take the mantle. I will be the one to shut it down. I'm not going to blame you for it.
Sources telling CNN Trump doesn't want to lose face with his base by caving on his signature campaign promise to build a wall. Though what that wall will look like is now an open question.
If you listened to him yesterday, he clarified that. He said that you can call it whatever you want. In other words, we need border security. It may include a wall. It may include steel slats.
Democrats, still enjoying their newfound power, are vowing not to give up any ground.
This is the Trump shutdown through and through.
But before even being officially elected today, Pelosi throwing a punch, suggesting in an interview with NBC News that a sitting president can be indicted.
It is not the law. Everything indicates that a president can be indicted after he is no longer president of the United States.
What about a sitting president?
Well, a sitting president when he's no longer president of the United States.
A president who is in office.
Okay.
Could Robert Mueller come back and say, I am seeking an indictment?
I think that that is an open discussion. I think that is an open discussion in terms of the law.
That wasn't her only jab. Pelosi also not denying telling members of her caucus that the wall is a, quote, manhood issue for Trump.
I wish that my members had not repeated that outside the room. But there's no justification for this wall. It is not the way to protect our border.
CNN is told the White House has formally invited congressional leaders back for further talks Friday, but expectations for a quick fix remain low after talks went nowhere this week.
Nancy Pelosi can ignore. Yesterday they just ignored and interrupted and was frankly just very rude and dismissive of our Secretary of Homeland Security.
White House officials telling CNN they're strapping in for a lengthy shutdown, with one aide adding, "We could be here a while." Now, Wolf, just to give you a sense of how unpromising the negotiations between the White House and Democrats have truly been this week, we are now being told by two sources who were in the room for the president's meeting with those congressional leaders yesterday that as soon as it commenced, the president started complaining about the state of his administration's nominees to Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. They were talking about that, and then the president reached into his jacket, pulled out that letter from the North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un, tossed it to Chuck Schumer and said, "Here, read this." Chuck Schumer started reading the letter, which we're told is about 1 page long. And while he was reading it, the president signaled to the Homeland Security Secretary Kirstjen Nielsen to go ahead and start with her briefing on the border. She started on that briefing, but she hadn't gotten long into it when Chuck Schumer interrupted and then instructed Nancy Pelosi to go ahead with the Democrats' proposals to reopen the government, something that the White House and Republicans have roundly rejected. Now, Wolf, those leaders are supposed to come back here to the White House tomorrow, but the outlook is not good, and it doesn't seem any more promising than it was when the president randomly handed that letter from Kim Jong-un to Chuck Schumer. Wolf.
In the meantime, this partial government shutdown continues, and the ramifications are clearly there. Caitlin Collins at the White House, thank you. Joining us now, Democratic Congressman Ted Lieu of California. He's a member of the Judiciary and Foreign Affairs Committees. Congressman, thanks so much for joining us. Now that you're officially back in the majority in the House of Representatives, your party is going to face some very tough choices. Some Democrats want to immediately move ahead with aggressive investigations of the president and his administration, potential impeachment proceedings. Others want to focus on passing legislation. What would you like to see the Democratic majority in the House prioritize?
Thank you, Wolf, for that question. We can do both. The Constitution charges the legislature, Article 1 of the Constitution, with both oversight as well as passing legislation. So we're going to pass legislation on health care, on infrastructure, on getting rid of corruption, and at the same time, we'll conduct our oversight responsibilities of the Trump administration and make sure that we hold the Trump administration accountable.
You heard Speaker Pelosi. She's taking a rather cautious approach to impeachment, but some Democrats, as you know, they want to pursue a very aggressive strategy on impeachment. Do you worry that impeachment could become a contentious divide within your own Democratic Party?
I do not. My view of impeachment is that, like the power to declare war, it is one of the gravest responsibilities of Congress. It should never be our first option. We should wait until Special Counsel Mueller completes his investigation. And I think all Democrats are in line with waiting for the investigation to complete before we make a decision.
The top Democrat on your House Judiciary Committee, Jerry Nadler, just introduced a bill to protect the Mueller investigation. Is there any chance, though, that that bill will garner enough support to override a presidential veto?
That I do not know. It will definitely pass the House of Representatives. The U.S. Senate, on a bipartisan basis, has also introduced legislation to protect Special Counsel Mueller. I think we can put a bill on the president's desk, and if Donald Trump wants to clear his name, he would sign that legislation.
Okay, YouTube viewers, I know I usually record entire segments of the news from start to end, but I'm going home to my mom's, so this is the end of the news on this channel for today. Thank you.